This is my new 3-tier water fountain that I made for my garden. I always like to have a water feature in the garden for the look, the sound, and for what it does. It gives water to insects and animals that come to my garden. Join me today as I show you how I made this. Hi, I'm Gardener Scott, and I really like the way this 3-tier garden fountain turned out. It only took about a day to put together. It's solar powered, so I don't have to worry about running wires to the house to power a pump, and it's just about the right size. The water fills the top, flows into the 2nd tier, and that flows to the bottom tier. So there's plenty of water for birds to land to drink and take a bath, for butterflies to land and take a sip, and even for Mala to get in when she gets really thirsty. So I like the basic design of this, and putting the whole thing together was a piece of cake. I began the project by just laying out all the pieces, the pots, the solar panel and pump, and then the supports that will be inside to support each of the tiers. I'm using resin pots, and the ones I chose have a plug at the bottom, which is perfect for running the water tube up to each of the levels. You don't want to do a project like this and then find out that the pump wasn't strong enough to pump water all the way to the top tier. So I went ahead and hooked up the solar panel. I had the pump in the lowest pot and water was in that pot. And then I wanted to measure just exactly how high the pump is capable of moving the water. I had put the pots together to get an idea of the final height, and this pump was easily capable of pushing the water up 4 feet. The bottom layer needs to be able to support quite a bit of weight, so I have a stone block that I'm placing at the bottom. This will support the next tier up, and I just want to make sure I have a good size so that I can fit the pump right next to it. The water tube needs to run up through the middle, so I'm just taking my chisel and I'm cutting this piece of stone into 2 pieces so that I'll be able to have a gap between the pieces where the tube will fit. I wanted to dry fit all the pieces together before I went with the final construction. So I put the 2nd pot in, and in that pot I'm using a solid hard plastic pot. I needed to let some of the water run in through the hole, and then I put the top tier in place. Now you notice that that top tier sits quite a bit higher. So I took my tape measure out to get a good measurement because I want that top tier to be the same height as the middle tier. It turns out that the top tier was about 3 inches too high. So I came in with my tape measure and a piece of chalk, and I measured the 3-inch point that I'm going to have to cut this pot. That's why I like these sturdy nursery pots. They're strong enough to be able to support some weight, but they're easy enough to cut. And I just used some tin snips as the easiest way for me to cut this plastic. It actually cuts through pretty quickly. You could use a saw or a knife, but this works best for me. And so I took the cut pot and went ahead and placed it into the 2nd tier to support the 3rd tier, and then took another measurement while everything is dry, and I think it looks pretty good. With everything dry fitted, now I'll drill holes using a 1/2-inch drill bit, first through the black pot and then through a planter base. I'll actually be putting this at the top of the fountain. With some water in the base, I feed the hose through the gap that I made in the blocks, and then feed the hose up into the second tier pot. And then I just continue feeding the tube first now into the support pot that's going to hold the third tier. I'm trying to keep the tube as vertical as possible as I put all this together. I don't want any crimping. And then I feed it into the third tier, and I'll just put this last pot on top of the support. And now I feed into the planter base again. With everything in place, I connect the solar panel, and I'm checking to make sure that I have good water flow all the way up to the top. You don't have to do a dry fit and a wet fit, but this is the school of thought that it's better to measure twice and cut once than to make the mistake by just cutting once and not having done all the extra checks. Because this next step makes the fountain semi-permanent. So I've drained out all the water that was in the base, fed the tube up into the middle section, and now I'm putting some silicone caulk around the hole and the tube. This is going to reduce the drainage back through this middle section into the base. If I didn't put this silicone around the tube, every night the water from the top tier and the middle tier would drain into the base and it would overflow. So this is helping to keep everything controlled as far as the water flow. With the silicone dry, now I add some more stone supports underneath the planter base that I've got at the very top of the fountain. And this base is going to hold a pretty good amount of weight, so I want that extra support underneath. And then I start putting in some decorative stones all around the central tube. With those stones in place, now it's time to make that first cut. I'm cutting the tube just below the top level of this fountain, the top tier. And this kit comes with a hard plastic tube. This is what supports the various fountain heads that I can put on top to get different looks. So I just slide that over the clear plastic tube and then add more decorative rocks around it. I add water to the base because it's almost time to do the final check of the fountain. As a solar powered fountain, the solar panel is important. So you need to select a location that gets full sun. And so I just put my solar panel on the mount that came with the kit. And now I screw it into the wire that leads to the pump. As soon as this is connected, that pump is going to start operating. So be ready for that. And you can tell visually and by sound if it's all working at this point. This basic design is easy to modify. You can have different size pots, different shaped pots, different color pots. I went with a bigger pot on the bottom because it's big enough for me to get my hand inside so that I can pull the pump out and clean the filter from time to time. I think that's an important factor because if I went with all of this more slender pot for each of the tiers, I'd have to take it apart each time I did basic pump maintenance. Probably the biggest limitation on a water fountain like this is that it's solar powered, which means the pump will only work when the sun is shining. Now, I don't think that's a big problem because the sun shines a lot in my garden. But I've already noticed in recent cloudy days, every time a cloud rolls over, the pump stops, and you lose the benefits of the water flowing and the sound and all the reasons you might want to have a water fountain. And it's difficult to find solar-powered pumps that are strong enough for higher tiers. That's why I like this one. I've put a link below if you're interested. It pumps very strong flow of water. I could easily have another tier and not worry at all that the water would be able to get to the top. I'm going to try this out for a season. If I like it as much as I think I will, I'll go ahead and do it again next year. But regardless of whether it's this design or another one, I'm always doing water in my garden. And if you want to see some of those other fountains that I've done, watch one of these videos next. I'm Gardener Scott. Enjoy gardening.